In this video, we're going to talk about the Earth's resources and what those Earth resources are used to make and how we can sustainably keep them and develop them. Now, it's really important as you go through that the little bits of the words that I use, you just use to answer other questions, because a lot of questions aren't specifically on this area, but they'll take into account this area with other areas. So let's start with the first bit and explain what we mean. Humans use Earth resources to produce warmth and then shelter, food, and then transport. Well, they're never going to ask you what do they use Earth's resources to provide. They'll put it in the context of a question. So, for example, what do you use for fuel? Well, you use the Earth's resources such as fossil fuels, wood, which is a renewable resource, but other things like coal, which is a non-renewable resource. Okay, and you might use wood again for shelter, which again can be a sustainable resource, okay, that you regrow. And then you can also make it out of brick, which is a finite resource, one that will run out, non-renewable. And then we've got the food. Is it synthetic? Is it made of synthetic materials? Is it natural materials? Natural materials are obviously, they can be sustainably produced as long as you're doing it in the right way. And then we go to the car. Well, what does the car run on? Well, most cars now run on fossil fuels, but a lot of cars in the future are going to run on electric. And so basically, what do you do with the car body as well? You know, where's the car body got? Well, that's mined. So it's all about thinking about what resources you have and how that is used to make materials around you. Now, natural resources. Natural resources are ones that agriculture can provide. So corn, for example, is a type of food. Timber, used for buildings and such and so forth. Clothing. And then fuels. Now, in the UK, we have E10, which means 10% of our fuel is made up from ethanol. Now, that ethanol can come from fossil fuels, but it can also come from plants. Now, if that is the case, we now need to move on to from our natural resources, which can be renewable and can be sustainable, to our finite resources. Now, finite resources are the ones that are non-renewable that will run out. Okay, now, what we do have now at the moment is fossil fuels, and you need to keywords again in green in these PowerPoints and things like that. Fossil fuels, and that includes oil, coal, and gas, and they all contain carbon. And remember that carbon is trapped in here from the atmosphere and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the original atmosphere. And then as we burn these, we are releasing it. So if you ever get questions, for example, that say, why is carbon dioxide released? Well, one of them is you're burning more fossil fuels and releasing this carbon into the air. Now, in terms of finite resources, what are these fossil fuels actually used to create? Well, they're used to create paint. They're used to create drugs. So a lot of your drugs come from fossil fuels, okay, and cosmetic products. So you've got all these products you might not think are made from these fossil fuels, and they're mainly made from oil. Okay, but they are. And so we have to look after them, okay, and we have to conserve them. And we have to start using more sustainable ways of making these materials. Now, if you take that and then we compare finite and renewable resources. Now, we've got our finite, our non-renewable resources, and we've got our natural resources over here. So we've got some food, and we have got some wood, which if it's in a sustainably produced forest, for example, they plant as many trees as they cut down, okay, then you can keep that going. Now, you can also have biofuels, and this is a picture of ethanol, which is a biofuel that can be used to power our cars, and they're natural resources, can be natural resources. But the important thing for the exam is this: these fossil fuels contain the carbon, and you must say that they're non-renewable. Non-renewable, finite, okay? And that's because they will run out and they take millions of years to create. We then go for the renewable resources, okay? As long as they're produced sustainably, means you can produce as much as you are making, so produce as much as you are making, okay, and that's sustainable, then that is the way forward, and that is a much better way for the environment and everything else. We're now going to move on to discussing mined resources. Now, almost everything can be mined. So everything that you use nowadays is often mined, okay? The only other option to mining is actually to grow it and grow it sustainably and things like that. Most of the stuff comes out of the ground. Now, ores are just rocks that are economical to extract, so you can make money from them. Now, I've put two keywords in here, and that's because they get you marks in exams, okay? So, if you're going to mine something, what do you need to think about? You need to think about the transport to take it and the energy used to mine it in the first place, okay? Now, normally we have them for batteries for electric cars, for example, structural materials, but there's many others. There's just two examples. So if we've got our digger trucks, you want to call them excavators, they're the proper word, and you can see that these carry a huge weight when they're digging, which means they burn a huge amount of fossil fuels, okay? So a lot of fossil fuels and big carbon footprint from these excavators. Then the excavator puts it into a large truck, okay? And these are huge trucks, if you've ever seen pictures of them, okay? And then usually the ore is transported onto a ship, which is then transported to the country that it is then processed. And again, another load of fossil fuels are then burnt to do the processing. But I just wanted to show you here, remember that ore is mined using lots of energy. Then it's placed into a truck, which again uses fossil fuels to transport, which is a lot of energy, which then transfers it onto that boat, which again uses fossil fuels to make lots of energy. And what we've got to do is think about that and think about how we can do that in a different way. And that will be happening in your lifetime. We're now going to go through two examples of natural products that have been replaced with synthetic products. And again, in the coming years, we're probably going to have to reverse some of these processes to go forward for natural products instead in order to conserve fossil fuels and such and so forth. Now, if that's the case, the first example is rubber. This is a rubber tree, and what they do in Southeast Asia, or have done in Southeast Asia, is they used to strip off a part of the bark and then tap it off and tap off this rubber from the rubber plant. That used to be used to make tyres and other materials. But then in the 1800s, a guy called Goodyear found out that he can make those tyres and make them more sustainably and better, with a better quality, with oil. So he then chose it, took the oil, added it to sulfur and other materials, and he made it into the kind of tyre we see today. Interestingly, he didn't make any money out of it, particularly in his lifetime. It was only recognised afterwards with the big company that's now called Goodyear. Okay. Now, rubber tyres used to be made from that rubber plant, but now been replaced by crude oil. So that's an example of a natural product being replaced with a synthetic. Now, next one is cork. Cork is made of natural wood, okay, and still is in the most part. But sometimes what they've done now is they've replaced them with these synthetic corks. You see the plastic at the top, which is made from crude oil, and the bottom part is also made of plastic, which again is crude oil. So two examples of how they've replaced natural products with synthetic products from crude oil.